Welcome everybody to Powerful Stuff Live, Pregnant Pause Edition. Make some noise if you've ever been inside a pregnant woman. What a naughty group. But we all had to be inside a pregnant woman to get here, as my little son will say. And that's the cool thing about the pregnant pause, is we were a part of someone else's pregnant pause. We were helping them be still before we became who we are. And so tonight we're going to be talking about the pregnant pause, because as many of you might have surmised, I am with child. And so I'm in my own pregnant pause between maidenhood and motherhood, between who I was and who I am. And what the pregnant pause asks us to do is to slow down, to be still, to allow for the gestation of what we are becoming. And if you think about it, the pregnant pause is kind of like how we get pregnant in the first place, because the egg does not swim to the sperm. No, it doesn't. What does it do? It sits there and it waits, and all the sperm fight to swim to it. So might we all be that sacred egg tonight, waiting for our sperm of possibility to swim and fertilize us with our next idea, you know? And wouldn't that be powerful? When we're swimming around or running around, we can't let the thing land. We can't let the sperm get to the egg. You have to be still and allow. And I've been loving, as I prep for birth, reading about hypnobirthing, which is all about mindset, visualizations, meditations to help you prepare for birth, which is all about reframing pain as power. So, for instance, in hypnobirthing, you don't call it a contraction, because a contraction implies tightening, squeezing, cramping up. You call it a surge, where it's like, this is a goddess wave bringing me closer to meet my baby. I'm allowing, I'm flowing with. And if you contract, it makes the labor harder. It makes the labor longer. And it makes you kind of fear it versus viewing it as a productive pain. And in real life, if we clench, we get hemorrhoids. Make some noise if you've had those. Woo! Okay, very honest crew. Okay, I've been having my chia pudding during pregnancy, so a chia a day keeps the hemorrhoids at bay, is what Meredith Baker says. But if we relax, if we allow, we breathe down the baby or the bowel movement, and at the end we get a beautiful baby or an easeful bowel movement or a next version of self, or ideally all three. Sometimes all at once, from what I hear from birth stories. Although if you are the husband, never mention it if you see the poop. It never happened. So how we can even lean further into this, because in Venice we're all about making our healing even better than the healing elsewhere, is actually the advanced spiritual practice of laughing at ourselves along the way, not taking it so seriously, but having those endorphin, that oxytocin release from some of the laughter and the spirituality of it. And so tonight we'll be getting a big dose of spiritual X-lax. How does that sound? Woo! Just easeful flow, allowing what that next version of us is going to be birthed for our pregnant pause. So if you've been to a Powerful Stuff event, you know that we can never do too many Venetian things here in West LA. So we'll start with 3 deep breaths to sync our energy together for our pregnant pause. So if everyone wants to close your eyes, take a deep breath in, breathing in, imagining that sperm swimming to your egg of your new idea. And as you exhale, feeling that sperm fertilize that egg of your metaphorical embryo and letting that out, feeling it implant in your uterus. As a man, you really get to experience what it's like for a woman tonight. And breathing in our second breath, whatever you're gestating in this egg, now letting it grow. And as you exhale, feeling that placenta start to form, giving it life, helping it survive in utero. And then third and deepest breath in, breathing in like you're feeling labor start to begin. It's time to allow for the pause, to allow that birth canal to open, holding at the top. And when you exhale, I want you to let it out like you're experiencing an orgasmic birth. So go ahead and exhale everything out. Wow, what a peaceful orgasmic birth, everyone. We're already well on our way tonight, and we have some mothers in the audience who might be able to tell us if this is what it sounded like in the labor and delivery room. I guess I'll find out in a month. So, as many of you know, I am a life coach, or kind of a doula for people's transitions, if you will, in life. I help people kind of step into the next version of themselves and surrender, kind of reframing the contractions as surges when they get triggered. You know, how is this thing happening for me instead of how is it happening to me? How can I lean in? How can I laugh with it? How can I allow? And so, of course, as a life coach, you have to be your own client zero. And the universe said, let's give you the ultimate test of surrender with pregnancy. And so pregnancy is kind of like a 10-month ayahuasca journey, except the shaman lives inside of you. And each week is a new module. Week 1 is trust the process. Week 2 is forgive your husband for breathing. Week 3 is trust your intuition and order Postmates, and then immediately change your mind once the Postmates arrive. And in ayahuasca, you follow a dieta before you go into ayahuasca. So no sex, no sugar, no alcohol. In pregnancy, it's basically the same, except the sex is a prerequisite for getting there. In ayahuasca, you have someone guiding you through your journey to your next version of self. They call it a shaman. In pregnancy, we have something similar, except it's called an OB-GYN, or in Topanga, a midwife. And all three are very familiar with your bodily functions, but only one bills for insurance. And at Spencer's in my last ayahuasca journey before we became parents, at the end of the ayahuasca, he told me, I couldn't tell if you were in insufferable pain or having an orgasm. And honestly, in pregnancy, sometimes that feels like the same. You're like, I'm a powerful goddess. Am I dying? Am I spiritually climaxing? And it's kind of like this idea of orgasmic birthing, which the orgasmic birthing movement isn't just literally an orgasm, but also this idea that pleasure can exist in childbirth, which isn't so taboo if you think about it, because at least one orgasm was used in creating the child. But ideally it's 2. But definitely with Spencer and me, it was 2, because he knows that she comes first. Say it with me, everyone. She comes first. Wow. What a good group of allies. When you're going on any journey of self-transformation, it can feel lonely. That's why it's important to have other people who are going through their own journey alongside of you. And I've been fortunate enough here in Venice to have a group of women where we all got pregnant at the same time, called the Preggy Pod. Who's here tonight? Make some noise, Preggy Pod. And, you know, as you know, pregnancy is contagious. So watch out tonight. Fertile with possibility, some would say. We're all birthing something. But the Preggy Pod talks about everything together. We talk about hemorrhoids, weird discharge, spontaneous, uncontrollable rage toward our husbands, who we love very much. And it helps us feel a little bit more normal. But the men of the Preggy Pod don't always share the same candor. I was so excited once when I heard that Spencer was hanging out with one of the other husbands of the Preggy Pod, because I thought, perfect, they can talk about how they can support their goddess wives during pregnancy. And he gets back from the hang, and I was like, how was it? It was good. How is he feeling about the pregnancy? It didn't come up. And I was like, well, what did you guys do? And he's like, we played video games. But honestly, God bless these men. They hydrate us, they ride the waves of our hormonal surges like a mechanical bull. And I even got Spencer a shirt that said, emotional support husband, do not pet. And he wore it once in the airport, and then he's never wore it again, because he said it was patronizing. But, you know, honestly, that's surrender lesson number 2, is that we can't control someone else's journey. And maybe they're getting the medicine that they need. Who am I to say the video games helped him emotionally regulate so he could be my emotional rock? However, I do wish that the guys did chat more, because then they'd realize we're not individually crazy. We're just pregnant. Or in our luteal phase. We're in our luteal phase for what feels like 10 months. Being pregnant, people asked us when we knew we were having a boy. Of course, there's the NIPT test, which you find out around week 11. But energetically, we kind of knew around week 9, because that's when the testosterone starts pumping through your veins, according to my free pregnancy app. And that's when we had an incident that we now fondly refer to as Chicken Gate. So we had just come back from a trip, and as a vegan, I had brought all these frozen berries to put in the freezer, and I discovered 5 frozen rotisserie chickens. Spencer didn't know they existed until 5 minutes ago, but they were taking up all the room in the fridge, so I'm like, I'm gonna move them down to the trash can. And so I did, and then 5 minutes later, Spencer brought up the 5 rotisserie chickens and put them back in the freezer. So I did what any normal vegan pregnant woman would do, and I grabbed all 5 frozen chickens. I walked to our balcony, and I hurled them into the alley. And I said, I will not have these fucking chickens in my fucking freezer. And then I started crying. Meanwhile, it looked like chickens were raining from the sky. And all of that's to say, that's when we knew we were having a boy. And now looking back, I was like, I was practicing my hypnobirthing, you know, riding the wave of the emotion, laughing about it, although it took a few weeks to do so. In knowing that we are having a boy, he can't speak yet, but he's already a feminist. And he will know that vulnerability is a strength, and that emotions are your superpower, and that consent is paramount. In case you guys were wondering, I did consent for him to be inside of me tonight, because boundaries so important. And raise your hand again if a pregnant woman played a part in your existence. Woo! So it's kind of a radical thought that maybe we should protect pregnant women at all costs, or at least as much as the people in the Epstein files have been protected. But it is interesting to me that women's rights are oftentimes made by men who can't even locate the clitoris. I'm sure that's none of you guys here tonight, though, right? Make some noise if you know where it is. Very assuring. Love it. We're going to have an anatomy quiz later. Something that we're thinking about, because it is 1 month, as per yesterday, until my due date, which they tell you to call a guest date. Everybody asks about your birth plan and then has opinions about your birth plan. And my stoic New York mom was like, why are you prepping so much for the birth? It's just 1 day, the baby comes out, and then that's that. But meanwhile, in LA, if you don't treat the birth like a sacred portal into your next version of self, they actually do revoke your Air One membership. I've seen it happen. And they tell you to call it a birth plan, but then immediately tell you to call it a birth preference, because the word plan offends the birthing gods. So I like to say that I'm holding a loose vision for an unmedicated hospital birth, but I like to follow it up with 38 disclaimers that no way is the wrong way, every way is the right way, whether you free birth or have a C-section or DoorDash your placenta. And if I tell my friends in Mid-City I'm having an unmedicated hospital birth, they're like, are you above the epidural? Modern medicine is amazing. And if I tell my friends in Topanga I'm having an unmedicated hospital birth, they're like, wow, so you're going to a hospital, huh? So apparently I'm both a reckless hippie and a big pharma sellout, or in improv, what we like to call a yes and. And then there's this incredible thing that happens in pregnancy where you create an organ from scratch. Does anyone know what it's called? Placenta. The pregnant women do. So the placenta basically sustains your baby and filters everything out. And yeah, so when it comes out, you know, a lot of people chuck it, but you can also encapsulate it and make it into tinctures or make art with it. You know, there's a lot of different things people do with placentas. And I will say I'm not sure what I would do with my placenta just yet, but as a vegan, if I were to eat meat, it would definitely be my own placenta because it would be more farm to table or or me to me. Jury's still out, but we'll see. We're also doing all the natural induction methods to prepare for labor, the raspberry leaf tea, the dates, the hip circles on my yoga ball. But one of the number one natural induction methods is getting the baby out the way the baby came in, which is through sex. Because sperm softens the cervix. But I oftentimes wonder, like, if Spencer and I are having sex, is it weird? Are we just like barging into our son's room unannounced? But then again, we created the room. And then when we are having sex, I can't help but wonder, you know, technically there are two penises inside of me right now. Except one created the other, which is kind of like the circle of life. Or as Spencer said, the circle jerk of life. Not sure how that works. But all of that's to say, powerful stuff. And so, you know, we're also not just birthing this child, but also transitioning from Venice. I've been here since 2017, 1 mile north to Santa Monica, which is kind of like Venice, but just 5 fewer plant medicine ceremonies per square mile. And we moved into this intergenerational apartment complex where being pregnant is kind of an invitation to talk to you. And something I've realized living there is there's just something about the pregnant belly. Everyone's hands start floating toward it like hypnosis, like it's a crystal ball. And they'll be like, "Can I touch your belly?" And I look down and they already are. And then there could be a whole list of things of, you know, what to say to pregnant women, such as, "Wow, you're a goddess," or "I couldn't tell you were pregnant from behind, you're so tiny, but what a cute little bump," or "Your child is going to have such an amazing mom." And then there's a whole list of things that maybe aren't the best things to say to a pregnant woman, which I've experienced in the elevator. One of which was a guy saw my belly and he goes, "Wow, my sister was smaller and skinnier than you, and she had twins, and then she broke her pelvis." And I was just like, "Sir, that's 3 strikes. I don't want to hear about the injury. I don't want to hear someone was smaller than me, and I certainly don't want to hear about how my baby bump carrying one baby reminds you of twins." I didn't say that, but I just landed on, "Wow, that is so interesting." And then some of the other conversations that are typical are like, "Are you having a boy or a girl?" "Boy." "Oh my gosh, I have a boy." And I'm like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's 52. And I was like, "Shut up, boy moms." Should we arrange a play date? But honestly, these people are just trying to connect, and that's part of the pregnant pause, you know, between stimulus and response. Do I spiral or do I soften? And so soften, indeed, I did. And gearing up for birth, I feel actually quite strong and primal, very active. As I was talking to some other pregnant friends, it's like you do feel quite strong, you know, going into birth. And I've been doing Barry's boot camp and Pilates, you know, very primal activities. And I will say, though, there is just something that evolutionarily happens when my husband walks into the room, where all of a sudden I'm just a damsel in distress. And he'll be like, "Can you take out the trash?" And I'm like, "But I'm pregnant." Oh, he'll be like, "Can you get the package from downstairs?" And I'm like, "But I'm pregnant." And he's like, "Can you respond to this email, like with our families?" And I'm like, "But I'm pregnant." And he's like, "Can you move over on the bed? Your pregnancy pillow's taking up too much space." And I'm like, "But I'm pregnant." And honestly, it's my favorite boundary that I've ever set. In this identity shift, I realized that I'm no longer just Meredith, but also now this thing called mama. Make some noise if you're also a mama. Woo! And I love it because I'll be walking down the street and people will be like, "How is mama? Is mama hydrated? Did mama get her latte? Did mama go to Pilates?" And I always wonder, when does somebody become a mama? Is it at the insemination or the first kick? Is it at the first prenatal Pilates? And is mama a prerequisite for becoming a MILF? Something that I'm very excited about. So in this identity shift, I'm 34 and pregnant, which in LA is a teen pregnancy. But in the deep south, I would almost be a grandma by now. But I didn't start thinking about it right when I got pregnant, this identity shift. When I was 27, I was a founder in a different life. And I was kind of struggling, if you guys can believe it, with external validation. And so I went to this life coach in Santa Monica. And I was telling her about this external validation conundrum. And she paused me and she goes, I have a very important question for you. And I'm like, what is it? And she's like, were you breastfed or formula fed? And I was like, I was actually formula fed, if you can believe it. And she's like, wow, that explains it. And so apparently I was seeking external validation outside of myself because I wasn't used to the life force being sustained with a nipple. So she immediately put me on this thing called bottle therapy, where you fill a baby bottle with almond milk and you suck it every night before bed. And so I'll try anything once. And I was doing it. And then on night 3, it hit me. I'm still outsourcing the nipple. How is this any different from when I was 3 months old? And so I threw away the bottle. And then years later, in fact, a few weeks ago, I found out my husband was breastfed until he was 2.5. And it doesn't really explain much about the external validation piece. However, it does explain why my husband loves the nipple. But yeah, pregnancy is kind of a time warp. It's both the blink of an eye and also 84 years. And whenever I have anxiety during my pregnancy journey, my stoic mom has other great advice for me, which is the safest your baby will ever be is actually inside of your womb. And it's kind of like he has to leave the place that has been the safest place he'll ever know. And it's the same for us to birth into this next version of ourselves. We can stay tight and cramped, or we can soften and allow ourselves to be stretched and opened. And this is kind of what hypnobirthing is teaching us too. If we resist, we clench, we tear, we fight the inevitable. But if we slow down, we allow ourselves to be birthed. And it's a funny balance because in LA, we can also kind of over-productize our healing journey. In hustle culture, it can be like a productivity overkill when we do go into this healing journey. It's like, did we journal enough? Did we go to a transformational retreat and like heal our inner child hard enough? Did we ayahuasca enough? Instead of performance reviewing our self-development, we could instead kind of take it with a little bit more levity and enjoy it a little bit more and laugh, because when we're laughing along the way with our journey, we're already healing, because self-amusement turns a pause into a portal. And in hypnobirthing, we want to create more oxytocin, and that's through like connection, through laughter, and that makes an easier passageway, because that allows us then more joy for our becoming. And when something tightens, if it's a fear, a trigger, maybe a transition in life, we can ask, is this a contraction, or could I soften? Could I allow? Could I find the humor in it? Could I treat it like a surge? What if this is opening me and instead not breaking me? And laughing is kind of the ego, or the butthole, if you will, unclenching. It's the cervix of consciousness dilating. The cervix is what we have to dilate for the baby to go through. So that's our hope for tonight in the heart of the pregnant pause. It's the sacred space between control and surrender, because life will always be pregnant with something. And when we stop forcing, we allow our own birth canal to open, and that's powerful stuff. Woo! And so now we'll all just have a moment to drop into a deeper meditation around what we're birthing next. So if everyone wants to close your eyes, taking a deep breath in, exhale it out. And then as you return in this nice slow breath to that egg that you had fertilized, that next version of self that you're birthing, just imagine it in your womb, or men, imagine it in your phantom womb. Imagine it growing, being fed from the energy that you eat, the conversations that you have, the thoughts that you think. And allowing yourself to sit with it as you feel it grow. And maybe as you feel it grow, you notice some tension. Maybe it's fear of the unknown, fear of what it will bring to you. And just imagine breathing with those fears instead of clenching. Feeling your anus literally relax, unclench. That's right. Oh no. That's what happens when you clench. No spiritual hemorrhoids here. So imagine those fears, just blowing them out with horse lips like you do in some of these birth, labor breathing. Blowing them out. Or if you were in the privacy of your own home, you might even fart them out. Hopefully not shart them out, though. But if you did, no judgment. And as those fears kind of fall away, feeling even more space, this thing that you're birthing growing even more inside of your belly, even more trust and excitement now for shedding what's meant to be shed, for becoming even more you than you were on the other side of this pregnant pause. And now imagine that you start to feel those first surges, bringing this thing to life, and that you're ready to say goodbye to the thing, the familiar life that you've known. Maybe you start to see in your mind's eye your birth team around you, your doula, your OBGYN, your partner cheering you on. Maybe in your metaphorical sense, those are friends, mentors, people who have helped you along the way. And now you start to feel that thing that you want so badly. Now you start to feel it gathering in intensity, like it's the pushing phase. But you don't forcefully push it. You just kind of breathe it down. You breathe it down and out. And then right when it feels like you can't do it anymore, that you feel like you're being ripped in half, you come back to that breath, that humor, and maybe you even laugh now. It's so close. I can't hear you. Your baby needs your laughter. And all of a sudden, this thing called the ring of fire has passed, and you've birthed your baby, this new identity, and you feel it skin to skin on your chest. This new version of you latches right away. Your milk starts flowing in like liquid gold, superior breast milk that they'd pay $100 per ounce for on the black market. And you just feel so content and happy with this new version of self that you've birthed, looking at it in the eyes, being like, wow, I created you, and I'll never be the same person I was before you. And then asking this little metaphorical baby, whatever you birthed, for a reminder, a mantra, a piece of wisdom, something to hold on to that will guide you through the actual process of birthing this thing to life. Trusting whatever mantra or word this baby says, because this baby can talk, because it's a baby genius. And letting that land. And then as the cord stops pulsing from the placenta, you're able to snip that cord, hold that baby, and feel like you've successfully birthed this next chapter into your life. And then the baby poops all over you. But you don't care, because you made it to the other side together. And you feel powerful and ready for what's to come. And the next initiation now begins, of surrendering control of this new thing that you've birthed, letting it take a life of its own, taking a deep breath in, exhaling it out. With that last breath, opening your eyes because you've just birthed the placenta too, which is also something you have to birth once the baby comes out. It's not just the baby, in case you were wondering. And then you can slowly open your eyes and give yourself a hand for creating your own birth of powerful stuff, whatever you were birthing tonight.